the viewers of RCI's Navshikar channel. I'm your host Shrijesh, and with me today is Dr. Renu Malviya, who is an Associate Professor, Department of Education, Lady Renu College, DU, who will be sharing her expertise and experience with us over the topic for today, teleconferencing. Welcome ma'am to our show.
Hello.
The topic for today is cognitive process for learning disabilities. So for all my viewers, I would like who or he or she is affected from this kind of disability, knowingly or unknowingly, to stay glued to our show and know more about it. So let us talk to our expert regarding the topic. Ma'am, learning disability. What can a normal person can understand with the term learning disability?
Learning disability is more often known as dyslexia, and the first step that you remember, you have to remember the movie Tare Zameen Par, and many of you will remember.
Sure.
And it's not only those people who have dyslexia, who have learning disabilities, but even those who are going to be special educators need to be glued to the television. Okay, so now when you're talking about learning disabilities, our topic for today is cognitive processes or structures in learning disability. But learning disabilities, as you know, consists of it's an umbrella term which we in India are using, or more often we're calling it now specific learning disability or SLD, and which includes dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, even aphasia. Today we will focus on dyslexia.
Okay ma'am, dyslexia or dyslexic disability. What can we know about the dyslexia, ma'am?
About
More information.
Okay, now for dyslexia, many of us already know that there are so many people who are dyslexics or persons with learning disabilities. There are many famous people, such as you can see the picture there. There's one more picture of the next is it has all the names of different people who are dyslexic. Now, dyslexia are people who are average or above average in intelligence, but their verbal and performance intelligence is very different. It's a common thing. When you talk to them, they'll emerge as smart, as intelligent as anyone else. But when it comes to their writing part, when it comes to their appearing for the examination, etc., it is really the other extreme, because dyslexics have an issue with the ability to read. So if there was no reading, the dyslexic would have lesser issues, but they would still have certain issues because it is the processing method which is at bay.
So I won't be wrong if I say to be famous you have to be dyslexic. Now you told about Albert Einstein, other famous celebrities. What are the other types, specific types of dyslexia we can see in our day-to-day life?
There are certain, I think the next slide needs to be brought in, is the famous dyslexics. So some of them here, I know many of these names appear to be famous, but every dyslexic is not famous. And remember, I just want to repeat again that specific learning disability consists of dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So, and today we are focusing predominantly on dyslexia. In parts of the world, in UK for example, dyslexia is still being used as the umbrella term. So under dyslexia, you have dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. In India, we're calling it specific learning disability, and under that umbrella, we're putting it as dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia.
It's related to reading, dyslexia. Ma'am, dyscalculia related to, and other dysgraphia?
Dysgraphia is related to the issues with writing. So in spite of the best efforts being put in by these education system, by the person, the chances of the writing becoming very good are very less. Of course, there's a certain amount of remediation which is done, and then of course the writing can improve. Regarding dyscalculia, again, it is the inability of not being able to do arithmetic effectively. But there's an interesting thing. Those who are dyslexic and have an issue with reading and not with maths may often not perform well in maths also. Very simple. क्लास नर्सरी में तो होता है ना 2+2 is equal to, and एक लाइन खींची और उनको किया, पर उसमें भी there's a certain amount of reading related. But as you go beyond that, the entire arithmetic numerical sum is based on your ability to be able to read, to comprehend, to be able to paraphrase, etc. Because you'll have questions like the farmer has this many goats and the farmer does this. So now that is all based on understanding the reading component.
Okay, we got to know about all the other types of disability other than learning disability, other than dyslexia. So ma'am, let's start with dyslexia, their personality, their behavior, or what or how like to have dyslexia. Start with dyslexia.
It's not
Okay.
coming out properly.
So
When we come to the definition of dyslexia or developmental disability dyslexia, it is a specific and scientific impairment in reading abilities unexplained by any kind of deficit in general intelligence, learning opportunities, general motivation, or sensory acuity. Now what do we see here is general intelligence is intact as reflected in a normal or above normal non-verbal IQ. Verbal and performance IQ may show usual or reversal dissociation, meaning if you have an IQ test done, although in finding out the level of intelligence which is based only on IQ test is now being questioned also. That is that because everyone, if you're talking about learning styles, if you're talking about multiple intelligence, then in that case the position of only an IQ test is not enough. But in the case of the children with dyslexia, in the case of children with learning disabilities, the variation between verbal intelligence and the performance intelligence is very high, which is the first indicator for any assessment person to think about, but probably we need to test the child for learning disability.
So we got to know about the IQ test that is performed to know about the dyslexic. What all the other possible associated deficits along with this?
Because of the entire issue is that the acquisition of language, because many of these children, when we say "b," it is an auditory discrimination, a sound which needs to be associated with the word "b." Now that association the child has an issue with that. Now that will lead to issues with oral language acquisition. Similarly, when you're talking about writing abilities, if we're going to say a word, say phonemes or must, mash, now again you need auditory discrimination, be able to discriminate each sound, otherwise the spelling will go wrong. With remediation processes the child learns, but to make it a naturalistic process, it is very difficult for the child. It doesn't come automatically to the child as it does to the non-dyslexic child. Again, the short-term memory, the taking in of too much of information and the time processes for it is limited, because the neurons, studies indicate the neurons in the child are in the brain of a child with dyslexia or learning disabilities, which could be dysgraphia or dyscalculia also, are much shorter, and this leads to the short-term memory limitations, and therefore the motor coordinations are also affected in these children at time.
So more.
So we here are certain slides which indicate the different deficits. So please, can we have the slides?
We can discuss it. I can discuss it, ma'am.
Okay. So here is dyslexia. So the dyslexia affects not only the reading part of the words, but it affects maths, it affects the lifestyle. Now when you know that you know so much, उसमें क्या होता है कि अपना सेल्फ स्टीम भी तो लो होने लगता है, लाइफस्टाइल कैरियर्स में इफेक्ट हो जाता है, उसका हेल्थ पे भी, उसकी बहुत सी बार मेंटल हेल्थ इश्यूज भी आ जाते हैं। इनफैक्ट बिकॉज ये बच्चे बहुत क्रिएटिव भी होते हैं, ज़्यादा काफ़ी हद तक क्रिएटिव होते हैं, इंटेलिजेंट भी होते हैं, तो बहुत सी बार अगर इनको ठीक तरीके से इनकी रेमिडिएशन नहीं हो, ठीक तरीके से इनका सेल्फ स्टीम के ऊपर काम नहीं किया जाए, दे कैन ईजिली मूव इनटू डेलिक्वेंट बिहेवियर.
So lifestyle and other health, all these affects the person with dyslexia. And what are the associated deficits that we can see with along with dyslexia? If we have a slides with that, we can.
Okay, so before we go on to the slide, let me just say this, is that the whole world is like a mosaic. हमने ज़मीन पे वो मोज़ेक होता है ना, डिफरेंट डिफरेंट फ्लोर पे, डिफरेंट डिफरेंट फ्लोरिंग पे डिफरेंट डिफरेंट टाइप के कलर्स होते हैं और होता है, तो उसमें उसका एक अलग है. सो द नेचर और ह्यूमन बीइंग्स इज फुल ऑफ दोज, एवरीवन इज डिफरेंट, नेचर लव्स टू बी डिफरेंट. सो इट्स नॉट दैट अ डिस्लेक्सिक ब्रेन इज डिफरेंट, so it is a useless brain. It is not an organized brain, definitely. Now, what type of things that it leads to is the inability phonological processing. In phonological processing, the issue that comes up is that the ability to crack the underlying written language becomes difficult for the child. So when you have a word, say for example, attention. So the child, there's a code in this to be able to understand the word attention. What are the different components to it? What is A saying here? What sound is A making? What does TION say? Now these are different parts of that coding code for the word attention. Now this is where the child finds it difficult. And people with with phonetic, with help, they can learn how to do this, but it takes a lot of time. So coming to the slide. So we have this phonology, dyslexia and possible associated deficits, oral language acquisition, writing abilities, mathematical abilities, motor coordination. Next slide. Postural stability, dexterity, temporal orientation, visuospatial abilities, attentional abilities.
You have the next slide along with it.
So here we had already spoken about nature loves diversity. The dyslexic brain functions differently because they are organized differently. Evidence, the phonological processing system, the ability to crack the code that underlies written language. That is the relationship between letters and letter groups with the spoken sounds they represent. Basic defect in segmenting and manipulating the phonemes constitutes of speech. Impairment in the brain visual mechanism of reading. People with dyslexia can learn these relationships with intense phonic training but have trouble doing it naturally.
So these are the evidences of difficulties in. So let's what's next to talk about is, ma'am, brain composition of a person with dyslexia. Ma'am, is this the brain composition is similar to a normal person than a dyslexic person? What are the different compositions? It's totally dyslexic, so you have to get into that brain composition of a person.
Okay, the brain composition, it's commonly said the brain wiring or the neurons wiring, we should rather say, is different in the case of learning disabled or under the learning disabled thing, the dyslexic, the dysgraphic, the dyscalculic, aphasia, etc. So in the case of the brain, the two major variations which recent research indicates is in the hemispheres, the cerebral cortex and the thalamus. Now, generally we would find that the non-dyslexic brain tends to be slightly asymmetrical. There's a variation in the two hemispheres. Although both the hemispheres it's not a major difference, but there are variations in it. In the case of the child with dyslexia or a person with dyslexia, it is both the hemisphere or the cerebral are symmetrical. There are studies which have shown when a person with dyslexia is doing an activity, is trying to write, is trying to read something, then the activity of the different components of the brain was studied. And it was found that the activity levels of different parts of the brain were different from those of the non-dyslexic. Now, in the case of the Broca's area, we'll find that the Broca's area in a brain of a dyslexic is larger. But there is another interesting thing, which is in the case of a person who is non-dyslexic, there's a different areas for understanding the word form. How is a word formed? How is a sentence formed? How does a sentence look like? The picture component of that. And the word analysis. When you analyze the meaning of that word is in different parts. In the case of the dyslexic, they are all clubbed together. So obviously the time processing, the understanding, there aren't many other support systems in the brain for the child to fall back to in the case of the dyslexic. There is also indications that the neurons are of shorter size in the case of the brain of a dyslexic. It helps in many other ways because they are able to see the larger picture much better as compared to the organized brain like ours.
So brain composition is really something very different from a normal person. We are saying that we see in normal persons. So
here are the slides that we have.
Okay, ma'am. Done with the
phonological awareness. We have already done this, but I'll just read it out. The ability to break words into speech sounds and the basics of phonemes. Auditory discrimination means recognizing differences in sounds, that is, the difference in mush, much. It's a little sound difference at the end, or the difference in the sound p, b, v. And auditory sequencing memory. Sequence of first thing to the next, which is the last sound, which is the first sound, which is the middle sound. Evidence of difficulties in language-based task. Rather, the child with dyslexia has difficulty with the language-based task rather than the concept itself. For example, the language that you may be using in a mathematical numerical. The concept may be clear to the child of how to do that maths. Visual identification. Confusion of letters and numbers or numbers. Remember how to spell. They may have difficulty in recalling the spelling of different words. The recall from the long-term memory into the short-term memory may take much more time as compared to other children. Difficulty in recognizing familiar words. Sequencing. Alphabets. Which alphabets comes first, which comes later on. Similarly, in the case of, say, planning your day, developing a timetable for yourself. The planning is all right, but how to execute it? Remembering from how to go from one place to the other. Organization. There is directional confusion. Which direction is a sequential direction? They would land up forgetting about this point to point to point. So the lack of transformation or reversibility are often affected.
Okay, so we see this a person with dyslexia doesn't have a organized way of working. They have some mixed up way, or randomly they work for their day-to-day life, not rather than a normal person. So, ma'am, any other brain composition slides we can see, ma'am? It's with you.
Yes, there are more slides that we can see. Short-term memory, we've spoken about remembering instructions, listen, concentrate for long periods, motor difficulties, pen grip, clumsiness, poor coordination, automaticity, ability to carry out tasks without thinking, which is also called naturalization of a process. We've also said about the difference in the dyslexic and the non-dyslexic brain. Structural difference in two parts of the brain of a dyslexic are predominantly in the cerebral cortex and the thalamus. Putting ourselves in a dyslexic learner's shoe, this is an example of what it appears to be in the case of how the child is able to see certain things. The perceptual dominance are often the figure ground perception is often not very obvious. In this slide, you can see how the child is focusing more on the gaps between the words rather than the word itself. So some dyslexics are prone to seeing the finer details, and in this example, they are drawn to the spaces between the words rather than the word themselves. They were able to look at each word individually. They can spell it out. However, the distraction of the rivers hinder their reading ability. So, the figure ground is an issue with them. Their distraction or perceptual dominance is an issue with them. We've already discussed the normal and the dyslexic, the so-called normal. What is normal is again a question mark. Is dyslexic normal or the non-dyslexic normal is a question mark. Is we can see in the case of the dyslexic brain of a person with dyslexia, the Broca's area is much larger, and all the activities takes place at that area. Now, when information is being processed, it is like a pendulum. It goes on from one place to the other, whereas there is more differentiation of areas in the case of a non-dyslexic brain. So each area has its own function. Here again, the same thing has been highlighted in the two hemispheres more in detail. Cerebral cortex is a six-layered outer part of the brain involved in high-level processing, which includes sensory and motor analysis, working memory, attention, language.
So these are the cerebral cortex difficulties, that is sensory and motor analysis, working memory, attention and language. So we'll continue our talk with ma'am. Till then, for our viewers, if there are any queries or suggestions for you, you can call us on our toll free number, that is 1800 11 2008. Our landline number is 011 265 609. You can also mail us on our website, that is rehabstd@ndc.vsnl.net.in. So time for a short break. We'll be back after that. मैं वो क्या
आप हमारे कंफ्यूजन हो
नहीं
गया है।
इंडिकेशन कैसे ले मैम, जैसे आप ये स्लाइड पढ़े
निकले आते हो। मुझे ये नहीं
वही
समझ
तो
में आ
मैं-
रहा है कि मैं पहले मैं डिस्कस
आप
करती
आप कंट्रोल यहाँ से रखिए, जैसे ये स्लाइड है आपकी,
से कनेक्टेड नहीं है ना।
कनेक्टेड नहीं है, कोई बात नहीं।
लेकिन
आप
आप
जब ये
ऐसे करेंगे।
हेडिंग पढ़ेंगे
So they'll play it that time.
पहले
Take खोल लीजिए. You just continue with that only.
तो वही तो मैं
वो
कहती हूँ,
अपना
इतना
करते
कंटिन्यू-
वही
रहेंगे.
हवा धीरे धीरे चल रही,
He plays many instruments.
सुनो जो कहानी
He
कह
loves
रही
Mohammad Rafi
है।
and cricket.
ये कहानी सदियों पुरानी है, ये
चंदा है तू मेरा सूरज है तू
This is Raj Bala.
मेरी आँखों का तारा है तू जीती हूँ मैं बस तुझे देख कर
with her husband and daughter. She loves cooking and watching TV.
सूरज है तू आ मेरी आँखों का
You just play it जो slide.
At the person.
कोई मुश्किल हो दूर मंजिल हो never stops us from dreaming हारता है वो हार माने जो we are what we believe in हम धरती को अंबर से मिला दे हम उड़ सकते हैं उड़कर दिखा दे हम छूले सितारों को We can touch the sky आशा के पंखों पे We can and we will fly We can and we will fly
Welcome back, viewers. After this break, we are with Dr. Renu Malviya. She is an associate professor in Department of Education, DU. So the topic for that we are discussing today is cognitive process in learning disability, and we got the information about dyslexia that's being continued with the ma'am. So ma'am, we are discussing about the brain of our dyslexic children. So what are other information that we can have about the brain?
So we had just discussed about the two important components, the cerebral and the thalamus, where the changes are. The thalamus, a way station located at the center of the brain, is the major stop for information transmitted from our sensory organs, that is the eyes and the ear, to the higher level processing cerebral area. So what do we see is, if the thalamus is not able to pass the information effectively, then the processing at the cerebral area will also be affected. Now let's have a video about the perception, disability and perception. This has been taken from the YouTube.
It is common knowledge today that people mainly think on two levels: verbally in words and non-verbally mainly in pictures. When people think verbally, they utter words in their mind and assemble them to form sentences. People think at the same speed they speak aloud, which is up to 200 words a minute. Non-verbal, that is thinking in pictures, is much faster. There is no need to wonder about the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Word thinking is linear and sequential, like when you speak. When thinking in pictures, ideas grow associatively, which means you are thinking in many different directions. People think more or less with both methods. A dyslexic usually thinks non-verbally. Their mental pictures are similar to three-dimensional virtual films, which can be produced by computers nowadays. Dyslexics don't need this technology. For them, the cinema inside is real and alive, and not just an illusion. Visual thinkers can let their imagination run wild in the realm of their fantastic imaginations. They can play with it, change it, move it, or take a walk in it. And this is where you can find the great talent of dyslexics. They can experience their imagination as reality. When verbal thinkers think of a tree, they think of the word and the sound tree, an abstract symbol which they learnt to associate with a real tree. Dyslexics, however, imagine a real living tree. They can look at it from all sides and perceive it in its entirety. Of course, this picture thinking conveys much more than the word tree the verbal thinkers think. Dyslexics find their versatile world of imagery very pleasant, real and positive. But when dealing with two-dimensional written language, only one aspect of this multi-dimensional thinking actually corresponds to reality. And this is where the dyslexic dilemma begins, when they run into those strange two-dimensional symbols, letters, words or other abstract symbols like notes or numbers.
So it was a nice
Dealing with letters becomes increasingly difficult the more abstract the word is, and the stronger their ability to experience their imagination is. Because a dyslexic is not able to match a symbol of an abstract word like put, is or was with a mental image, he gets confused about the blank picture. Because of his highly developed three-dimensional perception, a dyslexic does not try to grasp the word as a symbol, but instead as an object. Within no time at all, he has experienced dozens of three-dimensional views of the word image. Except for only a single one, they are all wrong. The result? The dyslexic is even more confused because imagination no longer corresponds to reality. His imagination perceives something his eyes don't.
So this was a nice animated presentation about the dyslexics and how they behave and how they take up with their things. Ma'am, can we briefly know about the animated video that we saw right now?
Okay. Did you notice that? See, the child with dyslexia likes to work with pictures. So their imaginary is of pictures and ours is of word thinking. And remember that saying which says a picture says so much more than a word than 1,000 words say. So the intake of information by a child with dyslexia or learning disability is much more, and therefore you will find when the other children are at some stage and the child with dyslexia in the classroom will suddenly get up and ask some irrelevant question. It's not an irrelevant question, it's just that the child is thinking so much beyond the rest of the class. Did you also notice that instead of going into the details, I always love to say is a child with dyslexia does not think much about commas and full stops. It's not important for it. The brain of the child with dyslexia, while the child with autism spectrum disorder will go into the details of everything, into the minutest of issues. Now, so the key words, the child with dyslexia here or the person with learning disability is focusing upon the major keywords. But we expect in the classrooms, in the education system, for the child to be able to write the complete sentence with its full stops and commas and its the's and is, and that's where it is difficult. So what are we doing in our classrooms, in our education system, is we are making a brain which is a dyslexic, if we can say the word dyslexic brain, a different brain, work in a way in which our brain works. And therefore, we create more issues and more problems for the child with dyslexia. The last part shows the child was able to learn the word put by a picture format. But what do is, many a times because of the way we try to teach phonological processing system to the child, we land up not realizing that we are creating more issues and more learning issues for the child. So coming to the next point from here is,
Ma'am, the next question I would like to ask you, is there any theoretical basis or any related discoveries or theories that is being provided for dyslexic child?
when we talk about the cognition or the brain will lead to the cognitive processes. How the brain functions, the structure of the brain will lead to the type of cognitive processing that particular brain will do because of the structure of that particular brain. So there are lots of theories on the type of brain and how information is being processed by the brain. Some of them can be divided into the biological theories and the others, the cognitive theories, the lateral theories. Let's go into them one by one. The cerebral motor, which is a biological theory, a recent theory is that a difference in structure or dysfunction in the cerebellum, the hindbrain, thought to be responsible for dexterity and automaticity, offers an explanation for all the manifestations of dyslexia. It affects speech processing as well as more general motor control processes, including time estimation and balance. Information from the language area of the brain and the magnocellular regions of the brain is processed through the cerebellum. And weakness in any or all of these areas could account for the different types and degree of dyslexia. The next is the magnocellular system. Literacy difficulties may be a result of the impaired development of a system of large neurons in the brain, the magnocells, that is responsible for timing sensory and motor events. The visual demands of reading draw on the visual magnocellular system, and any weakness can lead to visual confusion of letter order and poor visual memory for the written word. There may also be an auditory equivalent that is essential for meeting the phonological demands of reading. A weakness here can lead to difficulties such as confusion of letter sounds. We have many cognitive theories. Those were based on the biological ones earlier. The cognitive theories are the phonological processing difficulties theories, the visual difficulty theories, the temporal or timing difficulties related theories. Coming back to the phonological processing difficulties, although dyslexia can manifest itself in many ways, there may be a single cause, a phonological deficit. Some researchers assert that phonological processing difficulties are fundamental to dyslexia and can be found in all individuals with dyslexia. Other researchers accept the phonological deficit theory but see phonological problems as a symptom of dyslexia, while the cause is related to brain structure. So what are they saying? That because of a different brain structure, the phonological problems emerge. So it has direct link to our pedagogical issues, how we teach. Visual difficulties, dyslexic people may be unable to process fast incoming sensory information inadequately. This could explain the visual difficulties such as accuracy, fixation when reading. It might result in visual confusion of letter order, which can lead to poor memory of the visual form of the word. Again, this may be a symptom of a deeper cause. So what do we see here is the fast information that emerges, and the different type of brain structure is not able to accept that effectively. Temporal or timing difficulties. Phonological, visual or motor difficulties may all be indicative of an underlying temporal or timing difficulty rather than alternative explanation for dyslexia. This timing difficulties may also have their origin in brain structure. We also have what is called the so what have we seen here is that some of the theories which are based on the cognitive is that they are talking about a difference, and even the biological ones are talking about a difference in the brain structure, and which is leading to difference in the way information is being processed by that particular brain, or the cognition process of the person with dyslexia tends to be different. So at no point can we actually these theories tend to be leading towards the present ones, leading towards that there's not a do we call it a deficit in the brain, or do we call it a different type of brain? So next is the cognitive theories. We continue that. Automaticity. Some tasks may be less automatic for dyslexic individuals and may take up more of their concentration and attention than in the case for non-dyslexic individuals. Lack of automaticity or naturalization, as we call it, in basic skills such as literacy and numeracy could mean that people who have dyslexia are more likely to experience processing overload when they are required to carry out new or complex tasks. They may need far more practice at any skill before they achieve automaticity. This condition is linked with differences in the structure of the brain, of the cerebellum, and it is not linked to a deficit cerebellum. Working memory. Working memory is used to hold new information in the mind for a short time before it is rejected or transferred into long-term memory. Some theories regard inefficient working memory as being a key underlying factor in dyslexia. So what do we see here is the issue that is being experimented upon. First is automaticity, which often in special education we talk about naturalization also. Now in this case, in the case of certain cerebellum variation, structure variation, जो cerebellum में है एक different dyslexic brain का, उसकी वजह से certain areas में automaticity नहीं हो पाती है. So what will happen in the classroom when these certain assignments are being given, certain work is being given, or there's too much of multitasking happening? What will happen? The information processing overload हो जाता है. And therefore, you must have heard that a dyslexic brain tends to work 4 to 5 times harder to achieve the same things. Why? Because we are making a particular type of brain function in a different way altogether, which is not suited for that particular brain. So do we call it a deficit brain, a deficit cerebellum, or do we call it a different cerebellum? Coming to the working memory. Now here again, the ability of the long-term memory, for information to go into the long-term memory via the working memory and vice versa, is not effective because of the lack of time processing or the sequencing or the amount of time required in the transformation of this information in the case of a person with dyslexia or LD. Next is the temporal rate processing theory of dyslexia. Multi-system deficit, possibly based on a fundamental incapacity of the brain in performing tasks requiring processing of brief stimuli in rapid temporal succession. Sequencing and directional sequencing for a dyslexic is an issue. Inability to perceive the rapid acoustic elements included in human speech, namely the format transitions whose duration is as short as a few tens of milliseconds, is often not registered effectively by the dyslexic brain. The next which is often effectively used is often spoken about is the lateralization theory of dyslexia. It is often said that in our education systems we use more of left brain function, while the dyslexic is more of a right brain functioner. Samuel Orton was the one who talked about the lateralization of language functions to the left hemisphere was delayed in dyslexics so that the language prerequisites for learning to read could not develop normally. If you look at the diagram here, we see that some of the major left brain functions include analytical thought. Analytical thought will also have a certain directional sequencing in it. Logics, language, science and maths. Now in our education system, we focus more on these different areas rather than on holistic thought, which is a function of the right brain area. Intuition. You cannot expect a child to give you the right answer and the teacher saying, how did you get that answer? And the child says, bas mujhe pata tha. That is intuition. But will the child get marks for that? Until unless the child gives those steps one by one, logically, analytically, which is a left brain function, the child will not get that. Creativity, art, music. So what do we see is different collaboration and or communication between the hemispheres via the impaired interhemispheric transfer of sensory or motor information in dyslexia. So we saw here is that in our education system, the brain theories are indicating to us that the dyslexic is more of a right brain worker as compared to the education system, which is based more on the processes which are the forte of the left brain. Other is the transfer of information from the left to the right and vice versa is also affected in the case of a dyslexic brain. So that communication, which is a direct communication through direct parallel type of neurons from the left brain to the right brain, in the case of a non-dyslexic brain, the neurons may not be as correlated in the case of a dyslexic brain, and therefore it leads to many intuitions and creativities.
So with this we see that a normal person works with his left brain and a dyslexic person works with his right brain. So it's time for a short break now. So we'll continue our talk with Mr. Renu Malviya after coming from a break. Welcome back to all our viewers after a break. So we were with Miss Dr. Renu Malviya ma'am. She's an associate professor in DU in Lady Harding College. Lady Irving College, sorry. So we were discussing about the dyslexic patients, their brain compositions, and we got to know more about the left and right brains that's been worked. Right brain is being used by the dyslexic patients and left brain used by our normal persons. So ma'am, more about the brain, if there is anything.
Okay. I just want to add something here. Is yes, they tend to use. It is theories. I mean, the researchers indicate that the person with dyslexia, the person with learning disabilities, tends to use more of the right brain, and it's not that they don't use their left brain, or vice versa. And I just wanted to say they're not suffering, and they're not patients. They are just like any of us, but at times we tend to say that. Now coming to the learning, we continuing with the hemisphere variations. So in the classroom, like you asked, कि क्या फर्क हो सकता है क्यों टीचिंग में, तो उसमें हम आते हैं. So when we look at this, in the classroom, the left brain looks at, generally if you look at the type of teaching that happens is based on logical. The child who is better with languages, who learns through language, tends to score better. Emphasis on grammar, analytical, punctuation, sequence. Most of our studies, any subject you take, is based on sequential learning. Details, letters and numbers, decoding, short-term auditory memory, thinking according to rules and patterns. So for everything we try to found theories, rules, patterns, right? And that is again categorization, fine motor, sense of time, planned, controls, of course, the right side. So when you're coming to the right hemisphere abilities, and which we need to incorporate into so that these children can learn more effectively, is creative ideas, where the child divergent thinking. कुछ क्वेश्चन दिया, उसके पॉसिबल आंसर्स क्या हैं, एक्सपेरिमेंट करो कि ये वाला आंसर सही निकल सकता है, नहीं है. ज़्यादातर हम लोग एक क्वेश्चन, दो क्वेश्चन, एक एक्टिविटी, दो एक्टिविटी कर लेते हैं, पर पूरी हमारा टीचिंग प्रोसेस इसके ऊपर बेस्ड नहीं होता है. पिक्चर्स, एप्लीकेशन, एक्चुअल एप्लीकेशन टू डेली लाइफ, इंट्यूटिव. सो राइट ब्रेन जो होता है दैट इज इंट्यूटिव. आफ्टर ऑल इंट्यूटिवनेस कोई मैजिक तो नहीं है, मैजिक को फिनोमिनिस्टिक थिंकिंग नहीं है. इट इज इंट्यूटिव इज ऑल्सो बेस्ड in taking in information from the environment and coming to certain justifiable conclusions. Tonality, illustrations. Again, illustrations is linked with pictures. Simultaneity, big picture or the holistic picture. And this is symbols, speech, encoding, long-term visual memory. Think outside of the square. Gross motor. The sense of time is not controlled by the right hemisphere. So what do what have we seen here is that in the case of the right brain activities, which are more predominantly dominant in the child with dyslexia, is being able to think out of the box, developing the larger picture. क्लास में अर्थमेटिक का एक सम हो रहा है, उसमें ईच स्टेप के ऊपर फोकस होता है. बहुत सी बार क्या है, बच्चा वो एक फाइनल आंसर दे देता है, लार्जर पिक्चर आपको दिखा देगा कि इसका सोल्यूशन ये है, इसका. But the marks which you are going to give that child, the grading that you're going to do is only by the step, point to point to point steps, sequentially, systematically. Now this is ultimately, we also need to relook जो उसने ultimate if वो final solution पे पहुंच जाता है, is that wrong, or each step is always important. Certain places, yes, you need a sequential, step by step, point by point transformation. But do we need it for in every area altogether? Then illustrations. Now many of these children are or persons are, they learn by picture thinking. So illustrations, multisensory approach become extremely important for this brain to be able to take in, retain, and then retrieve that information. So encoding, coding would be more effective if multisensory, auditory, illustrations, pictures, involvement, applications. A reason why we do a particular formula is understood by the child, then the retention of that information in the right brain is more effective. So what do we find is dyslexia only a negative thing, or does it have any gifts in itself? It is also called, there's a whole book written on the gifts of dyslexia. Not all children have all these abilities, but many of them have abilities in these areas: artistic skills, musical skills, creative, global thinking, or what did we say? A holistic approach. Curiosity and tenacity, intuition, athletic abilities, maths, conceptualization skills, 3D visual spatial skills, mechanical abilities, vivid imaginations. So when you're talking about the cognition processes of this child, and we also saw earlier a whole thing about कि क्या क्या चीज में ये बच्चा जो है वो इफेक्ट होता है, उसका कैरियर्स वाज वन थिंग. सो व्हेन यू टॉकिंग अबाउट विविड इमेजिनेशन, कौन से ऐसे कैरियर्स एंड वेयर डू वी फाइंड lots of people with learning disabilities? It is in the hotel industry, it is in the theater areas, it's in the cinemas, it is in fine arts. Why? Vivid imagination की ज़रूरत होती है वहाँ पर, right? Or when you're talking about, say, the hotel industry or PR work, public relation officers, event managers, इन सब areas में एक global thinking, holistic thinking की ज़रूरत पड़ती है. साइंस में भी पढ़ती है. जब भी तो आइंस्टाइन ने वो E=mc² फाइंड किया था और किसी से तो हुआ नहीं था ना, तो होलिस्टिक थिंकिंग थी ना, एक लार्जर ग्लोबल 3-dimensional 3D थिंकिंग थी ना. सो दैट इज अगेन अ राइट ब्रेन फंक्शन. So these are some of the abilities that are in dyslexia, children with dyslexia, in the cognition processes of these children, because they are inclined towards a particular type of brain function.
So, ma'am, can I ask you one thing about the education system? It's in a proper way, and you discussed that dyslexic children don't work in a proper way. They are never organized, step by step solving questions. It's not done by them, but they can find the answer proper. So, what changes or what changes that can we see for dyslexic child in our education system?
Okay, before we do this, हम एक छोटा सा experiment करते हैं. क्या can the camera be focused here? जो एक non dyslexic brain है हमारे जैसा, I hope we are non dyslexic, but even if we are, it's all right, no problem at all. This is how information is categorized. हमें इनपुट प्रोसेसेस मिलते हैं कहीं से, तो हमारी इंफॉर्मेशन जो है हम डिफरेंट कैटेगरीज में कर देते हैं. ये बर्ड्स हैं, ये एनिमल्स की कैटेगरीज है, ये किसी और चीज़ की कैटेगरीज है. प्रॉपर और इंफॉर्मेशन आएगी तो वो फर्दर ऐसे कैटेगराइज हो जाएगी. जो एक डिस्लेक्सिक बच्चा है वो इंफॉर्मेशन जो एनवायरनमेंट से लेता है वो ऐसे मिक्स करके इस प्रकार से उसकी इंफॉर्मेशन आती है. अब क्लास में क्या होता है? नाउ द टीचर सेज identify which are the different birds you know. So the brain of a non-dyslexic brain, वो फोल्डर उठाया, ब्रेन में का जो फोल्डर है, ब्रेन में जहाँ पर वो इंफॉर्मेशन कैटेगराइज्ड है बर्ड्स की, वो निकाल ली इंफॉर्मेशन, एंड द चाइल्ड इज एबल टू से दीज आर द डिफरेंट बर्ड्स. जो चाइल्ड विद dyslexia goes into its brain, looks there like this, doesn't find it. This then realizes no, this is an animal, leaves it back there. फिर एक थोड़ी सी देर फिर वो इधर से करता है कुछ और कनेक्शन. Oh, parrot is green, the grass is also green. No, that is not the information that was required. फिर वो क्या करता है? Ultimately उसको निकल आता है yes ma'am, parrot. अब जब तक by this time the entire class has moved on 2 steps forward, and therefore this is a different type of organization which is not used. But the relationship between green, relationship with very other things is very easily formed by this child. The holistic picture is evolved by this type of brain. In the over categorization here, the holistic picture or divergent thinking is often not, or finding unusual solutions is not very obviously present. So coming here is back to the next slide, is as you were saying कि क्लासरूम में उसकी limitations इस बच्चे की क्या हो जाती हैं. वो हैं जैसे inability to sound out new or unfamiliar words, difficulty understanding isolated words when not in context. Relationship वो अपने आप बनाने की कोशिश करता है. Poor at distinguishing similarities and difference in words. For example, no, on. Minute differences इस बच्चे को के ब्रेन को, इस बच्चे को नहीं, इस बच्चे के ब्रेन को क्लियरली प्रोसेस ही नहीं हो पाते हैं. Weak at letter sound discrimination. For example, pin, pen. Auditory discrimination difficulties है तो वो sound discrimination automatically, that is auditory discrimination. Poor comprehension. अभी little enjoyment of leisure reading. Poor spelling. Early problems with rhymes. Wandering while trying to retrieve words and relying instead on stuff or things. Guessing while reading or substituting similar words like food for fork or puppy for dog. Avoid reading aloud. Difficulty summarizing or retelling a story. Trouble discerning left from right. Poor grasp of if then analogy. So क्या हो रहा है इसमें? In the classroom, reading these is क्या इन बच्चों को स्टोरीज पढ़ना नहीं अच्छा लगता है? The point is that उनको पिक्चर फॉर्म में वही स्टोरीज बहुत अच्छी लगती हैं. With the advent of the multimedia, it's such an advantage because now on the video, on the multimedia, they're able to read the same story rather than see the same story being enacted. Of course, we also have issues with the imagination in that case. Yes.
So we get to see with this the functioning of or the limitations that a child with dyslexia faces. With this, ma'am, with the thing you presented here, so with this we get to know the person with dyslexia or the child with dyslexia needs some time. He or she needs space or time to cover up with some work. So is this right?
राइट या रॉन्ग तो पता नहीं है, पर हमारा एजुकेशन सिस्टम इसमें पॉजिटिविटी नहीं देख पाता है, क्योंकि हम हर चीज़ को सीक्वेंशियली कैटेगराइज कर रहे हैं और ये ब्रेन नहीं कर रहा है, उसको हम डेफिशिएंट ब्रेन में डाल देते हैं कि उसमें. पर द पॉइंट इज़ कि वो डेफिशिएंट है या नहीं है, पर उसके स्ट्रेंथ्स को हम हाईलाइट नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. और वो स्ट्रेंथ्स क्या हैं कि डाइवर्जेंट थिंकर है और जनरलाइजेशन उसके लिए डिफ़िकल्ट होती है, पर डाइवर्जेंट थिंकिंग में होलिस्टिक अप्रोच वो फॉलो करता है. तो क्या वो हमारे एजुकेशन सिस्टम में कहीं कहीं यूटिलाइज कर पा रहे हैं या नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, इज़ द इशू. सो
the main thing that we can look up for is how to identify this kind of children's.
Absolutely.
Their tendencies of dyslexia. How can a parent or a teacher can identify the person or the child is dyslexic or not?
Okay. Now again, it depends on the cognitive processing of these children and the secondary manifestation of those characteristics here. So, identifying people with dyslexic tendencies, it is crucial that responsibility for assessment should not rest with one individual, but should be a whole school responsibility. What we call the multidisciplinary team. Reading difficulties. Some of the difficulties, this is for screening. I teach as teachers, we need to first screen and then assess with the help of different tools. So screening would include things like hesitant and labored, especially when reading aloud, omit, repeats, adds extra words, reads at a reasonable rate but has a low level of comprehension. I'll leave out some of these and come to has difficulty in pinpointing the main idea in a passage, finds difficulty with dictionaries, directories, encyclopedias, letter combinations that make sounds like f, th can be difficult, pattern of errors, prejudice, necessity, substitution of words with similar meanings when reading aloud. Let us not go into more details here and move on to the issues with writing. Writing issues for dyslexic students. Spelling words. Look at this diagram here, which has the star बीच में है और सारी तरफ circles हैं. तो देखिए इसमें क्या क्या issues pick up होते हैं. ये हम child who has an issue with reading will also have issues with writing, इसलिए नहीं कि वो dysgraphic है, but उसके difficulties in reading की वजह से ये issues आते हैं. जैसे spelling words, the way they sound. तो auditory डिस्क्रिमिनेशन करने में प्रॉब्लम है, ऑडिटरी प्रोसेसिंग में प्रॉब्लम है, इसलिए मिस स्पेलिंग हो रही है. कंफ्यूजिंग वर्ड्स विद सिमिलर साउंड्स, अगेन ऑडिटरी डिस्क्रिमिनेशन, ऑडिटरी सीक्वेंसिंग, ऑडिटरी कंपैरिजंस में इश्यूज हैं, इसलिए वर्ड्स, सिमिलर टाइप ऑफ वर्ड्स, पिन, पेन, फैन, बैन, विल, इसमें बच्चे को कंफ्यूजन होता है. लीविंग वर्ड्स आउट. सो जब सीक्वेंसिंग कर रहा है, देर आर इश्यूज विद सीक्वेंसिंग, ऑडिटरी एंड विजुअल सीक्वेंसिंग, सो ऑटोमेटिकली द चाइल्ड वुड टेंड टू लीव आउट सर्टन words from there. Writing slowly and making lots of drafts. Writing very fast before you forget your ideas. Your own personal issues are here. Not being able to understand what you have written. Organizing ideas into an order. So again, categorization, sequencing are difficulties of the child with dyslexia in the cognitive processes of each person with learning disabilities. So organization of orders of ideas into a particular order become difficult. Spelling problems में भी difficulties आएंगी, जैसे वो produces badly set out or messy written work with spellings cross out several times, spells the same word differently in one piece of work. This is a very clear indication of a person with dysgraphia, of course, but also many dyslexic show this type of screening issues, where the same spelling is spelled differently one after another. Letters out of sequence, inconsistent use of some letters with similar sounds. For example, sir, Z says z. Difficulty with words ending with, say, y, I. Confusion or omission of vowels. Difficulties with words with double consonants. Fingers as French, omitting short words. Might omit function words opposite to content words. Article principles, conjunction, prepositions.
So with this, we are getting an idea that a person with reading, spelling, or writing difficulties can be categorized into a dyslexic child. So ma'am, these can be pointed as negatives for a child. What are the positives that we can see in a dyslexic children's?
Okay, जो राइटिंग वाला भी, वो राइटिंग इश्यूज जो हैं उसके, वो इसलिए भी हो सकते हैं कि उसको रीडिंग इश्यूज हैं. तो हर बच्चा जो राइटिंग ठीक नहीं लिख रहा है वो ऑटोमेटिकली कैन नॉट बी क्लासिफाइड एज अ डिस्ग्राफिक, क्योंकि वो एक मैनिफेस्टेशन, उसका जो सेकेंडरी मैनिफेस्टेशन है कि वो ठीक से नहीं लिख पा रहा है. हमको वर्क करना है उसके प्राइमरी मैनिफेस्टेशन के ऊपर. तो आते हैं, हाँ आप कह रहे थे कि कॉग्निटिव स्टाइल्स वैसे करना है. तो जो एक डिस्लेक्सिक का जो कॉग्निटिव स्टाइल्स होते हैं वो दे जनरली आर inductive thinkers, practical experience over rules and regulations. They tend to think, when the inductive thinkers हैं, मतलब कि वो practical application, actually कैसे वो चीज़ हो रही है उससे ज़्यादा समझते हैं rather than following rules and regulations for that particular thing. So they need a lot of hands-on activities. They're concrete learners. That means they need hands-on activities for everything. They're spatial learners. That means three-dimensional. When they work with models, when they work with three-dimensional things in creative ways, their learning is much better. So playing in different ways with different activities, with words, with sounds, with comprehensions, with tables is what helps them learn better. Intuitive thinkers, visual spatial thinkers, form of thought in which images are generated. They are able to work better when they can form images of what the learning is. Their cognition tends to be better with the help of images, pictures. Their holistic learning style. They're multitaskers. They like to take in information from different areas and work on it and come to a conclusion from there onwards.
So, has we heard about this tendencies that there are multi-sensory teaching is there? A holistic approach. What can we know about the holistic approach? Is it whole or something else?
Okay. Okay. So now when you're talking about the multisensory approach,
Okay.
there are different types of learning, different senses that we use for any cognition for the child to be effective learners. So I can, for example, there's this photograph that you can see here. The right brain person would actually visualize a car, while the left brain person is thinking about the word car. So when you ask the child to write CAR, the left brain person is able to write CAR. The other would develop a picture, and picture is not what the education system is asking the child to do. The child is asking to make a CA car. So when we come to the next is, so what do we need for children for the effective cognition development of the child with dyslexia? What do we need to focus upon is the holistic approach. The holistic approach consists of the whole child. You must be thinking, ये whole child को तो लेके आएंगे ना, उसका एक खाली brain तो उठा के class में नहीं लाएंगे ना. When we're talking about the whole child, we're talking about the overall holistic development of the child. Not only focusing upon the scholastic, but the co-scholastic. अब extra scholastic नहीं कहते हैं, अब co-scholastic इसीलिए कहते हैं कि उसके through भी जो learning होती है. So language, thought, then academics, physical, fine muscular coordination, gross muscular coordination, everything needs to be evolved together. Relationships, family school dynamics need to be evolved for the effective learning of the child with dyslexia. The whole family, in the involvement of the entire family, the whole school approach and the whole society approach. The whole school support means there's one special educator who has taught something explained something in a particular manner. But is the general teacher able to take it forward? Is the ayah or the worker in the school system also acclimatized to how these children learn and so on? That is the whole school approach. So in other words, the teaching of dyslexics should include multisensory approach, cumulative approach. It should be thorough, active, useful, meaning meaningful. It should relate to the daily life, and it should be structured.
So with this, all the information that we got, the one thing that we can easily pick up is, if I think of a car, the word car will appear, CAR. For a child with dyslexic, he will see the car in actual sense. Is that right, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll continue our chat with Miss Dr. Renu Malviya, ma'am. So it's time for a short break. We'll be back after a short break. Thank you.
ऑटिज्म एक व्यापक विकासात्मक विकलांगता है जिसके लक्षण जीवन के प्रथम 3 वर्ष में ही दिखाई पड़ते हैं, जैसे असंगत खेल, असमान स्थूल एवं सूक्ष्म गामक क्रियाएं, शाब्दिक संकेतों पर अभिव्यक्ति न देना,
Where is the cup? देखो, open your eyes, open करो, open करके, open.
नियमित कार्यक्रम परिवर्तन का विरोध करना एवं अवलोकनीय शारीरिक उच्च स्तरीय या निम्न स्तरीय क्रियाकलाप। UNCRPD 2007 सेक्शन 1 ऑफ आर्टिकल 4 निशक्तता के क्षेत्र में कार्यरत प्रोफेशनल के प्रशिक्षण पर महत्व देता है। ऑटिज्म के क्षेत्र में सरकारी एवं गैर सरकारी संस्थाएं कार्यरत हैं जो भारतीय पुनर्वास परिषद द्वारा पंजीकृत हैं। सोसाइटी फॉर एडवांस स्टडी इन रिहैबिलिटेशन एक ऐसी ही गैर सरकारी संस्था है। कनिष्क 13 साल का एक ऑटिस्टिक बच्चा है जो इसी संस्था से प्रशिक्षण प्राप्त कर रहा है। असंगत क्रियाएं, कार्यकलापों में निरस्ता, असमान स्थूल एवं सूक्ष्म गामक क्रियाएं जैसे बॉडी रॉकिंग और फिंगर रिगलिंग उसमें देखी जा सकती है। उसे मैचिंग और पेस्टिंग, पॉइंटिंग जैसी क्रियाएं सिखाई जाती हैं।
Very good. Glass. Where is the glass? Glass. Very. कप को टच करो जल्दी से। कप को। Where is the cup? Very good. कप में क्या करता है कनिष्क? टी पीता है। चलो ग्लास। Where is the glass? Very good. चलो बाउल की तरह बाउल जल्दी से टच करो बाउल को। Very good. बाउल में क्या करता है कनिष्क?
तथा साथ ही साथ रोजमर्रा की आवश्यकताएं जैसे खाना, पीना, कपड़े पहनना, और व्यायाम संबंधी प्रशिक्षण दिया जाता है। ऑटिस्टिक बच्चों को भिन्न भिन्न प्रकार की कार्यविधियां उनके स्तर के अनुसार सिखाई जाती हैं, जैसे कुछ बच्चों के लिए कलरिंग विद इन वन एरिया, मैचिंग एंड आइडेंटिफिकेशन, फाइन मोटर स्किल्स, आई हैंड कोऑर्डिनेशन, कंसेप्ट ऑफ वेजिटेबल्स, फ्रूट्स, बॉडी पार्ट्स, कलर्स पर जोर दिया जाता है तथा कुछ को प्रश्न पढ़ के उत्तर देने में और रोजमर्रा की आवश्यकताओं को पूरा करने में सक्षम बनाया जाता है। इसके अलावा राइम्स, डांसिंग, सिंगिंग द्वारा लेजर एंड रिक्रिएशनल एक्टिविटीज में भाग लेने के लिए प्रोत्साहित किया जाता है। इन सभी कार्यकलापों एवं प्रशिक्षण का एकमात्र उद्देश्य उन्हें स्वनिर्भर बनाना है ताकि ये डगमगाते पांव सक्षम बन जीवन के एक एक पायदान पर दृढ़ता से आगे बढ़ें और अपनी मंजिल को पा लें। एक तारा टिमटिमाता, उसने आकाश को छू लिया। एक लौ जली कहीं, उसने अंधकार को मिटा दिया।
Welcome back to all our viewers. Before leaving for a break, we were discussing the holistic approach, the society, the child, the school, and the family. I want to, regarding this, I want to ask you, ma'am, how these 4 things are interconnected to each other.
Okay. नाउ लेट्स स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द क्लासरूम. सारा इशू तो लर्निंग रीडिंग का ही क्लासरूम से ही आया, अब वो सोसाइटी में जाता है. सो नाउ आई विल जस्ट लुक एट दिस पर्टिकुलर स्लाइड एंड आई वुड से इसको कॉपी कर लो, क्योंकि फिर मैं आगे बात करने लगूंगी तो वो देख नहीं पाओगे बाद में. क्लासरूम स्ट्रक्चर, इसमें आप क्या देख रहे हैं, वो लाल एक सर्कल बना हुआ है. स्टूडेंट जो है वो इफेक्ट कर रहा है टीचर को और टीचर इफेक्ट कर रही है स्टूडेंट को. अब कैसे स्टूडेंट कैसे इफेक्ट कर सकता है टीचर को? अगर मैं डिस्लेक्सिक हूं और एफर्ट टीचर समझती है मैं लेजी हूं, वो जो कि ऑफन होता है, या मैं काम नहीं कर रहा हूं, या मुझे काम दिया जाता है तो मैं भूल जाता हूं, ये तो एक्टिविटीज होती हैं. ऐसा लगता है कि डिस्लेक्सिक कैसे होते हैं, तो वो टीचर का परसेप्शन इफेक्ट करते हैं. टीचर अगर सेंसिटाइज है तो वो स्टूडेंट को इफेक्ट करती है. इसी प्रकार से पेरेंट टीचर का रिलेशनशिप, वो एक दूसरे को इफेक्ट करता है, और स्टूडेंट पेरेंट का इफेक्ट करता है एक दूसरे को. जो क्लासरूम में जो कुछ हो रहा है, एक और ग्रीन सर्कल है, स्क्वायर है, लगता क्या है एक्चुअली कि स्टूडेंट और टीचर का इंटरेक्शन ही क्लासरूम इंटरेक्शन है. लर्निंग खाली बेस्ड है स्टूडेंट्स और टीचर पे, पर नहीं, पेरेंट्स का डायनामिक्स और स्टूडेंट इन्फ्लुएंस करता है क्लासरूम में. क्या पेरेंट्स उसको घर में उसको सेल्फ कॉन्फिडेंस मिल रहा है? क्या घर में जो स्कूल में हो रहा है उसका सपोर्ट मिल रहा है? क्या स्कूल या उस पेरेंट्स को इन्वॉल्व कर पा रहे हैं कि वो बच्चे को सपोर्ट दे पा रहे हैं? राइट? तो ये पेरेंट और स्टूडेंट या पेरेंट चाइल्ड रिलेशनशिप जो है वो क्लासरूम डायनामिक्स को इन्फ्लुएंस करता है. दूसरा, अगर टीचर समझती हैं कि पेरेंट्स हमें सपोर्ट नहीं दे सकते, पेरेंट्स को कुछ नहीं आता, तो एक्चुअली पेरेंट्स को कुछ नहीं कर पाएंगे. अगर उनको आता भी होगा या उन कर सकते होंगे, अनटिल अनलेस पेरेंट्स और टीचर्स का डायनामिक्स, एक दूसरे को अंडरस्टैंडिंग. बहुत सी बार पीटीए में काफ़ी लोग जो ये देख रहे हैं, हाँ, वो स्कूल्स में एज टीचर, ऑल ऑफ यू जो स्कूल में एज स्टूडेंट्स रहे हो, पीटीए मीटिंग होती है. पीटीए मीटिंग से पहले क्या होता है, ऐसा लगता है कि एक युद्ध होने वाला है. एक तरफ टीचर्स बैठेंगी, एक तरफ पेरेंट्स बैठेंगे, और बच्चे के बारे में बोला जाएगा. आपने बच्चे के लिए ये नहीं किया, पेरेंट्स टीचर्स को अक्यूज करेंगे, टीचर्स पेरेंट्स को करेंगे. काफ़ी ऑफन ऐसे होता है, सब जगह नहीं होता. हाँ, मुझे दिख रहा है कि कुछ लोग आप में से कह रहे हैं कि नहीं हमारे स्कूल में ऐसे नहीं होता, हमारे स्कूल में ऐसे नहीं होता था, हम ऐसे नहीं करते, पर काफ़ी जगह ये ऐसा होता है. तो उसमें क्या हो रहा है, पेरेंट टीचर डायनामिक्स के ऊपर डिपेंड करेगा कि क्लासरूम में क्या कर सकते हैं. अगर बच्चे में लगता है कि इसमें सपोर्ट चाहिए, क्या वो पेरेंट्स को टीचर कह सकती है, या टीचर को लगता है मैं इसमें सपोर्ट नहीं दे पा रही हूँ, हैंड होल्डिंग नहीं कर पा रही हूँ, क्या वो टीचर पीटीए में या अदरवाइज पेरेंट्स से कह सकती है या कह सकता है कि मुझे नहीं समझ में आ रहा है इसका, मैं कैसे क्या करूं, और पेरेंट्स से सपोर्ट ले सकें. तभी अगर उनका एक दूसरे का एक रिलेशनशिप डेवलप हुआ होगा ऑफ कंफर्ट लेवल्स, जहाँ की वो एक दूसरे को अपने एक दूसरे पर डिफेंड नहीं कर रहे हैं. तो ज़्यादातर यही होता है. ये सारी चीज़ें, ये सारे रिलेशनशिप्स जो हैं वो क्लासरूम को इफेक्ट कर रहे हैं. अच्छा, क्लासरूम किससे इफेक्ट होती है? सुना होगा कि जो साउथ एशियंस होते हैं, इंडियंस होते हैं, ऑल अक्रॉस द वर्ल्ड, आवर चिल्ड्रन डू मच बेटर एज कंपेयर टू अदर चिल्ड्रन एकेडमिकली. स्पोर्ट्स में नहीं, स्पोर्ट्स में गिने चुने लोग करते हैं, क्योंकि हमारे पेरेंट्स कहते हैं खेलो, थोड़ा बहुत खेलो, पढ़ने बैठ जाओ, पढ़ना ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. बहुत सी वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज में खेलने को बहुत इंपॉर्टेंस दिया जाता है. राइट? तो डिपेंड क्या कर रहा है, सोसाइटी. स्कूल सिस्टम जो है वो ही कर पाएगा. थोड़ा सा चेंज हो सकता है, उससे बियॉन्ड नहीं चेंज हो सकता. जो सोसाइटी पेरेंट्स एक्सपेक्ट करेंगे, पेरेंट्स क्या एक्सपेक्ट करेंगे, जो सोसाइटी एक्सपेक्ट करेगी. अगर कोई है जो अभी आप लोग मुझे देख रहे हैं इस चैनल को इस समय पे, जिनके पेरेंट्स कहते हैं कि चलो बेटा जितने मर्जी आए खेल लो, तो तुम जाके पार्क में कोशिश करो पूरे दिन खेलने की. तो जो तुम्हारे नेबर्स हैं वो आके तुम्हें कहेंगे बेटा कुछ और करने के लिए नहीं है, पढ़ना नहीं है तुमको, पूरे दिन तुम खेले दिखते, पार्क में खेलते हुए दिखते हो। नेबर्स कौन है? लार्जर सोसाइटी ना, वो भी यह बातें कहेंगे। तो देखो कैसे एक साउथ एशियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में स्पोर्ट्स को लेसर इंपॉर्टेंस दी जा रही है, ऐसे ही समवेयर एल्स में किसी और चीज को ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंस दी जा रही है। को करिकुलर एक्टिविटीज, आजकल CCE आ गया है, कंटिन्यूअस कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव एजुकेशन, हमारे चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया के लिए बहुत अच्छी चीज है अगर ठीक से इम्प्लीमेंट हो, क्योंकि एक होलिस्टिक अप्रोच है। एंड द कॉग्निटिव प्रोसेसेस ऑफ द चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया टेंड्स टू सपोर्ट अ होलिस्टिक अप्रोच। ओके, नाउ उसमें क्या सुनने को मिलता है कि को स्कॉलास्टिक एक्टिविटीज को बहुत ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंस दी जा रही है। सो सी हाउ द सिस्टम इज चेंजिंग and it is becoming easier in this case for the child with dyslexia to get involved more into the larger system. So the larger system is deciding whether the child of a particular special need will be incorporated or will not be incorporated effectively in the system. Again, so that is about the school system itself also. एक क्लासरूम में क्या हो रहा है विल ऑल्सो डिपेंड ऑन स्कूल की फिलॉसफी क्या है। जो स्पेशल एजुकेशन कर रहे हैं और डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ स्कूल्स में जाते हैं, उनको तो अच्छी तरह से पता है क्योंकि वो इतने स्कूल्स में गए हुए हैं। उसमें क्या होता है कि कुछ स्कूल में डिसिप्लिन, बिल्कुल आवाज़ नहीं निकलनी चाहिए, कोई क्वेश्चंस नहीं पूछने चाहिए। नाउ द क्लासरूम में भी फिर वही होगा, ज़्यादा बच्चे क्वेश्चंस नहीं पूछेंगे, पर किसी और स्कूल में क्वेश्चंस आर अलाउड। यू कैन मेक नॉइज इन द क्लासरूम टू एन एक्सटेंट। नॉइज इज नॉट ऑलवेज बैड, यू कैन टॉक टू ईच अदर। और या सिटिंग अरेंजमेंट ही फर्क होता है, तो स्कूल अलाउ करता है वो सिटिंग अरेंजमेंट जिसमें तुम अपने पीयर ग्रुप के साथ इंटरेक्शन कर सकते हो। नाउ इन दैट केस व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, द स्कूल सिस्टम इज इन्फ्लुएंसिंग द classroom activities, the larger world. अब लास्ट एक सर्कल, एक पर्पल सर्कल था और उसके बाहर एक ब्लैक सर्कल था और वहां लिखा था द वर्ल्ड एट लार्ज और बियॉन्ड द कम्युनिटी। If you look at the area of disability studies, it's barely 35-40 years when actual work has been initiated into it. काम तो हमेशा से हो रहा था, पर more of it. Did suddenly you and I become more active? हमारा एजुकेशन सिस्टम ज़्यादा एक्टिव हो गया था स्पेशल एजुकेशन को, या हमारे ऊपर प्रेशर पड़ा था लार्जर वर्ल्ड से, लार्जर कम्युनिटी से? बहुत सी कॉन्फ्रेंसेस आपको पता है, इंटरनेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंसेस हुई थी जिसकी वजह से इंडिया ने पार्टिसिपेट किया था उसमें, एंड देन इंडिया बिकॉज वी पार्टिसिपेटेड एंड सेड वी वांट टू बी अ पार्ट टू दैट, उसकी वजह से हमारी कंट्री में डीपर चेंजेस आने लगे थे स्पेशल एजुकेशन में। सो किसने इन्फ्लुएंस किया? लार्जर कम्युनिटी ने आज स्पेशल एजुकेशन को हमारी कंट्री में इन्फ्लुएंस किया। सो एक होलिस्टिक अप्रोच के लिए क्या आज एक नवशिखर चैनल चल रहा होता? ये एक प्रोजेक्ट के रूप में स्टार्ट हुआ, इतना बड़ा बना, क्यों? बिकॉज सब तरफ से एक इंटरेस्ट इवॉल्व हुआ। सो दिस इज द होलिस्टिक अप्रोच। आप बैठ के इसको देख रहे हैं, कुछ और नहीं देख रहे, क्यों? आप में एक लार्जर इंटरेस्ट होलिस्टिकली डिफरेंट एरिया से आप तक आया और आपको इसमें इंटरेस्ट डेवलप होना शुरू हो गया। So this is the larger structure of a holistic approach. हमने अभी क्या पहले देखा था कि एक होलिस्टिक डेवलपमेंट के लिए, अप्रोच के लिए हमें चाहिए ओवरऑल डेवलपमेंट, हमें फोकस करना है ओवरऑल डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द चाइल्ड, ऑल द डिफरेंट एरियाज ऑफ डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द चाइल्ड, पूरी फैमिली का इन्वॉल्वमेंट का ये मतलब नहीं है कि हर बच्चा, हर फैमिली मेंबर बैठ के उस बच्चे को पढ़ाए, बट एन अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ व्हाट इज हैपनिंग। पूरा स्कूल जिसमें बहुत सी बार होता है कि बहुत सी बार स्कूल्स में जो से बस ड्राइवर हैं, कंडक्टर हैं और सपोर्ट स्टाफ है, उनको सेंसिटाइज नहीं किया जाता, रह जाता है, नहीं हो पाता है उनको सेंसिटाइज। तो जो क्लासरूम टीचर, स्पेशल एजुकेटर, जनरल टीचर, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर्स जो थिंक्स चाइल्ड विद स्पेशल नीड्स के लिए उनका सेल्फ कॉन्फिडेंस बढ़ाने की कोशिश करने के लिए, उनको रेमेडिएशन प्रोसेसेस देने में काम करते हैं, वो अंडरमाइन हो जाता है बिकॉज सब लोग उसमें इन्वॉल्व नहीं होते हैं। इसी प्रकार से पूरी सोसाइटी का। तो लेट्स सी, जब हम पूरे एक चाइल्ड का ओवरऑल डेवलपमेंट की बात कर रहे हैं तो किन चीज़ों का हम क्लास में ध्यान रखते हैं। उसमें डिफरेंट टाइप ऑफ लर्निंग स्टाइल्स होते हैं, यानी कुछ बच्चे जो हैं, जैसे अभी हमने देखा, जो कि वर्ड स्मार्ट होते हैं। ऊपर की तरफ देखिए, जहाँ पर एक पिक्चर, एक पेज जैसा सा बना हुआ है, वो वर्ड स्मार्ट है। पर हमारा वाला जो बच्चा है, चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया, चाइल्ड विद लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटी, वो पिक्चर स्मार्ट है या पीपल स्मार्ट है, पर वो वर्ड स्मार्ट नहीं है। अगर हम एक होलिस्टिक स्कूल अप्रोच देखेंगे तो उसमें इन सब डिफरेंट टाइप ऑफ ब्रेन स्ट्रक्चर्स का के लिए प्लेस होगी, यानी डिफरेंट टाइप ऑफ मल्टीपल इंटेलिजेंस के लिए इसमें स्पेस होगी। लॉजिकल स्मार्ट, सीक्वेंस, एनालिटिकल थिंकर, हमारा वाला बच्चा जो लर्निंग चाइल्ड, हमारे सभी बच्चे हैं, पर द चाइल्ड विद लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटी जो है वो मोस्टली लॉजिक स्मार्ट नहीं होएगा। वो हो सकता है म्यूजिक स्मार्ट हो, वो बॉडी स्मार्ट हो, या सेल्फ स्मार्ट, मतलब अपनी फीलिंग्स को समझ पाता है। Like for example, many authors do this. By the way, are you aware that Agatha Christie was dyslexic, but she was self-smart. She was a writer, but nobody could really understand her writing. She couldn't understand it herself also. But she knew how to weave stories, how to think of, empathize with those stories. So she was self-smart. So क्या हमारे क्लासरूम में कॉमन गोल्स, पर्सनल पोटेंशियल्स, कॉमन गोल्स हैं, यानी कि सब बच्चे पढ़ेंगे, सब बच्चे को अपॉर्चुनिटीज मिलेंगी टू द बेस्ट ऑफ देयर पोटेंशियल, पर एक कॉमन गोल होगा कि सब लोग एक पर्टिकुलर लेवल ऑफ स्टडीज तक जाएंगे, पर हर बच्चे की पर्सनल पोटेंशियल के अकॉर्डिंग, डिफरेंस इन पर्सनल पोटेंशियल के अकॉर्डिंग उसको एजुकेशन प्रोसेसेस उस तक पहुंचेंगे। दैट इज व्हाट इज टॉकिंग अबाउट द स्कूल, होल स्कूल एंड होल चाइल्ड अप्रोच। तो अब हमने देखा इसमें कि कैसे डिफरेंट टाइप ऑफ learners learn differently. And by now understanding the different theories that we have discussed, the different limitations and strengths of the child, of the cognition process of the child with learning disability and with major focus on dyslexia, हमने ये देखा. एक बात मैं फिर से रिपीट करना चाहूँगी कि हम जब कहते हैं कॉग्निटिव स्ट्रक्चर्स या कॉग्निटिव प्रोसेसेस, वो कहाँ से आते हैं, उसके लिए एक हमें ढांचा चाहिए. वो ढांचा कौन सा है? वो हमारा ब्रेन स्ट्रक्चर है. ब्रेन स्ट्रक्चर से वो प्रोसेस आता है. अब बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ जो अब नेक्स्ट स्लाइड पे हम जाते हैं और उसमें देखते हैं कि बहुत सी बार ये बिहेवियर कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स जो हमारे बच्चों में आ जाती हैं या जिसको हम सेकेंडरी मैनिफेस्टेशंस भी कहते हैं, वो कैसे इमर्ज होती हैं. बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग सा मुझे ये डायग्राम हमेशा लगता है. द होल चाइल्ड अप्रोच. इसमें आप देखिए कि कॉग्निटिव एनर्जीज हैं. दिस चाइल्ड with learning disabilities per se, dyslexia, has a certain amount of cognitive energies. सबकी cognitive energies हैं, अपने अपने स्टाइल की हैं. उसका इफेक्टिव यूटिलाइजेशन अगर हमारा एजुकेशन सिस्टम नहीं यूज़ कर सकता है या लार्जर सोसाइटी नहीं करती है, तो क्या होता है कि इट लीड्स टू इमोशनल मोर यूसेज ऑफ द इमोशनल एनर्जी। तो बच्चा क्या है, कोशिश कर रहा है, पर जिस तरीके से वो बेस्ट लर्न करता है उस प्रकार से हम उसको नहीं पढ़ा पा रहे हैं, तो उसमें क्या होगा, फ्रस्ट्रेशन होगा, वो इमोशनल एनर्जी जो है ओवर यूज होंगी। जब वो इमोशनल एनर्जीज के ऊपर ज़्यादा प्रेशर पड़ेगा तो यू विल फाइंड, ऑफन कहा जाता है कि द चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया, द चाइल्ड विद लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटी इज ऑल्सो अटेंशन डेफिशिएंट, इज हाइपर एक्टिव, ऐसे ऐसे वर्ड्स यूज होते हैं। पर एक्चुअली हो क्या रहा है कि वो उसकी इमर्ज होती है फिजिकल एनर्जी में। आप लोग बैठे हुए हैं पिछले 1.5 घंटे से, अब बैठा नहीं जा रहा ना ज़्यादा देर, अब उठने का मन कर रहा है ना, क्यों? क्योंकि आपका अटेंशन डेफिशिएंट लेवल पहुंचने लगा है। और क्यों पहुंचने लगेगा? अगर इंटरेस्टिंग नहीं लग रहा था ये और जबरदस्ती बैठाया जा रहा है तो और भी जल्दी उठने का मन करेगा। अगर इंटरेस्टिंग लग रहा है तो थोड़ी देर और बैठेंगे आप। उसमें क्या है, फिजिकल एनर्जी। तो अब वो बच्चा जो है वो लगता है जैसे कि वो हाइपर एक्टिव है, ADHD, पर ADHD लाइक कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स आ रहे हैं, सेकेंडरी मैनिफेस्टेशन हो रहा है। इसके बाद क्या होता है कि रिजर्व एनर्जीज में पहुंच जाता है। जब तब भी उसका कॉग्निशन एनर्जीज जो है इफेक्टिवली नहीं यूज़ कर पा रहा है एजुकेशन सिस्टम, तो रिजर्व एनर्जी में यानी बीमार पड़ने लगेगा, खांसी होने लगेगी उसको, इस टाइप के मेडिकल और मेंटल हेल्थ, फिजिकल एंड मेंटल हेल्थ इश्यूज इवॉल्व होने लगेंगे। एक दो नीचे आप देखिए, I was diagnosed as dyslexic in the first grade after I scored 180 on an IQ test and could not read. Another child said, "Auntie, I'm better than the blue coat holder." Blue coat holder in certain schools is the topper of the classroom. So see how the cognitive energy is not being effectively used leads to other secondary manifestations of in the child.
Ma'am, I would like to ask regarding this. I would like to ask a question. What is the acceptance level of a society towards this dyslexic child?
Okay, the acceptance level, that's a very wonderful question, and really we should do a perception study on this.
Pleasure.
Yes, you know, of course अब थोड़ा सा वेरिएशंस आ रहा है, इतने सारा अवेयरनेस, सेंसिटाइजेशन क्रिएट हुआ है, उसकी वजह से फैमिलीज़ में भी एक खाली डॉक्टर इंजीनियर, ये नहीं है कि चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया और चाइल्ड विद लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटीज़ डॉक्टर या इंजीनियर नहीं बन सकते हैं और बन सकते हैं। आफ्टर ऑल उनकी इंटेलिजेंस लेवल इज़ एवरेज और अबव एवरेज इन इंटेलिजेंस, राइट? तो वो भी उनके बन सकते हैं। पर इसमें सबसे बड़ा रोल है कि नॉट ओनली प्रोफेशनल्स का सेंसिटाइजेशन, प्रोफेशनल्स को बताना का कि हाउ ट्रेनिंग ऑफ प्रोफेशनल्स इन हाउ टू इफेक्टिवली प्रोवाइड द बेस्ट सर्विसेज टू दीज चिल्ड्रन। इट इज़ ऑल्सो इम्पॉर्टेंट कि फैमिली जो है वो सेंसिटाइज हो, अवेयर हो इनके नीड्स के बारे में। सो व्हाट इज ऑल्सो कॉल्ड द होल फैमिली अप्रोच, जिनमें से आप में से जो पर्सन्स विद डिसेबिलिटी जानते हैं, मतलब जिनके पास के संपर्क में हैं, या स्पेशली चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया और लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटीज़ के संपर्क में हैं, काफ़ी बार देखा जाता है कि हो सकता है मदर को समझ में आ गई है, मदर कहती है कि हाँ ठीक है, नहीं कोशिश करता है, पर somebody else will say बिल्कुल नालायक है। The grandmother will say, the grandfather will say, the chachi will say, the mommy will say, or somebody mama will say, or somebody will say, it's good for nothing. देखो कुछ भी नहीं पड़ता, ये तो बेकार है, क्या करोगे तुम लाइफ में? Now the sensitization is limited to only few people. और लोगों का कोई ये नहीं देख रहा कि वो और किसी एक्टिविटी में कितना इफेक्टिव है, सब ये देख रहे हैं, देखा ये तो 90% नहीं आया बना है, right? So that is the whole family approach. That is there. इसको बिठाओ, इसकी हैंड राइटिंग के ऊपर फोकस करो, and the parents might get a scolding from the grandparents or from other relatives saying आप इसको रोज एक कर्सिव पेज राइटिंग का पेज करवाइए. आप करवाते नहीं हैं ठीक से, करवाते हैं वो कर्सिव की, पर उसकी हैंड राइटिंग इन स्पाइट ऑफ ऑल द ट्रेडिशनल मेथड्स टू बी यूज्ड, उसकी हैंड राइटिंग इज नॉट इम्बिकमिंग. ये स्टोरी बुक्स नॉवेल्स नहीं पढ़ता है, वो नॉवेल्स जो पढ़ता है वो मल्टीमीडिया पे पढ़ना पसंद करता है. So why? So if the whole family is sensitized to it, then the child is able to function better. So we have here the next slide. Is the grandparents is not only the father, mother and child who are the ones who have to grapple with all the problems. What the father thinks, does is also influenced by his side of the family. What the mother does or feels or it is influenced by is also going to be affected by their side of the family. The families, the nuclear family diets is going to be affected by others. अब ये जब बच्चा स्कूल जाता है, इट्स नॉट ओनली पेरेंट्स, मदर एंड फादर, उनकी सोच के ऊपर सारा कुछ डिपेंडेंट है, पर लार्जर फैमिली की सोच में भी डिपेंडेंट है. मेरा बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग मानना है कि स्पेशली विद चिल्ड्रन विद स्पेशल नीड्स में ग्रैंड पेरेंट्स डे एक्सेट्रा जो होता है वो बड़ा इफ़ेक्टिव मेथड होता है इसमें आने के लिए. आजकल मल्टीमीडिया बहुत यूज होने लगा है.
Yes, sir.
तो उसके बारे में बताएं कुछ.
बिल्कुल मैम.
ओके. तो आगे नेक्स्ट आता अगर हम देखते हैं कि अ ब्रेन एबकस, आजकल अ ब्रेन इज डिफरेंट, तो उसके लिए हम असिस्टिव डिवाइसेस यूज कर सकते हैं. एबकस, रिकॉर्डर, स्पेल चेक, CD-ROMs, मैजिक पेन आते हैं आजकल, ड्रैगन स्पीकिंग है, टेक्स्ट टू स्पीच एंड स्पीच टू टेक्स्ट, सब कहते हैं जॉज, ड्रैगन स्पीकिंग, डेजी बुक्स. ये तो चिल्ड्रन विद ब्लाइंडनेस के लिए हैं. नहीं, ये चिल्ड्रन विद ब्लाइंडनेस के लिए तो हैं ही, पर ये डिस्लेक्सिक चिल्ड्रन विद डिस्लेक्सिया के लिए भी बहुत इफेक्टिव होते हैं, बिकॉज उसमें फिर उनको रिटन वर्ड नहीं यूज़ करना पड़ता है, तो ऑडिटरी प्लस पिक्चर फॉर्मेशन वो कर पाते हैं. तो उनके लिए ऑनलाइन वीडियो मैग्नीफायर्स हैं, और ये है कितने सारे ICT सपोर्ट्स जो कि हमारे नेक्स्ट स्लाइड पे हम जा सकते हैं अब. और नेक्स्ट स्लाइड पे आता है एक लार्जर आइडिया ऑफ कितने प्रकार के डिफरेंट टूल्स हैं. प्लानिंग में हेल्प करते हैं बच्चे को, टीचर को हेल्प करते हैं, स्पेलिंग और वोकैबुलरी में हेल्प करते हैं, वर्ड बैंक डेवलप करते हैं, कीबोर्ड्स के हैं, वर्ड प्रोसेसिंग है, स्क्रीनर्स हैं, स्कैनर्स हैं, जो कि एक चाइल्ड विद डिसेबिलिटी एंड ऑल्सो द चाइल्ड विद डिसलेक्सिया के कॉग्निटिव प्रोसेसेस में सपोर्ट दे पाते हैं.
Ma'am, with this, at last but not least, I would like to ask, what's the feeling of a child, dyslexic child, अगर जब उसको पता लगता है कि okay, I'm not a normal child, though he is a normal child, but he is affected by some disability, like kind of this dyslexic. So what is his feelings?
That's a question which जो मेरी इंटरेक्शंस हुए हैं बच्चे, चिल्ड्रन विद डिसलेक्सिया, चिल्ड्रन विद डिस्ग्राफिया, चिल्ड्रन विद रादर स्पेसिफिक लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटीज में, एक हिडन डिसेबिलिटी है ये.
Hidden disability. We can
अगर फिजिकल चैलेंज है, दिख रहा है, औरों को भी दिख रहा है. अगर ब्लाइंडनेस है, दिख रहा है, औरों को भी दिख रहा है, राइट? ये हिडन डिसेबिलिटी है जो कि दिखता नहीं है, तो ऐसा लगता है कि और लोग उसको समझ नहीं पाते. दूसरा ये होता है कि वो बच्चा खुद बार बार नहीं समझ पाता है कि मैं सच्ची में नहीं पढ़ रहा हूँ या सच्ची में मेरे को पढ़ने में प्रॉब्लम हो रही है.
Okay, so with this word of hidden disability, it's a hidden one.
We want to show the last slide if we can.
Yeah, sure. We have a live slide with
Which
gift of
is
dyslexia.
gift of dyslexia.
can't read it.
Okay, these and many other like them succeed because of their dyslexic gifts and not despite their dyslexia.
With this note, not despite the dyslexia, it's time to wrap up our today's teleconferencing. We show our gratitude and pleasure to have you, ma'am. Thank you for your valuable time with us. And for the viewers who has been through with us during all the during the time of the show, would like to thank you and till the next teleconferencing. It's bye and take care from Shijesh.